Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is Thursday, June 10th. We are presented by Topps. Check out Topps Project 70, celebrating 70 years of Topps baseball cards. Michael Beller and Derek Van Riper here with you on this Thursday. As you know, every Thursday, we like to check in with a few of our beat writers. And if you're watching on YouTube, as you can see, our first beat writer already here with us, Sahadev Sharma, one of our two Chicago Cubs beat writers, joins the show. Sahadev, thanks for being here, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, Sahadev, I don't think you can talk Chicago Cubs right now and not first mention Patrick Wisdom and what he has done since getting the promotion. 364, 417, 955 slugging percentage, 8 homers in 48 plate appearances. No one thinks Patrick Wisdom is the second coming of Babe Ruth, but how real is what he has done to this point of his brief MLB career?
Yeah, I mean, this is what the Cubs have been searching for a while. Someone to kind of surprise them at the major league level, someone that may be a little bit older, but that they can develop at the major league level and kind of unlock some potential there. This isn't, this is completely out of the blue in the sense that nobody had Patrick Wisdom on their radar entering the season, but he's also with a higher draft pick. Has some pedigree there. Dan Kantrovitz was running the Cardinals draft at the time. He's now with the Cubs. He's their VP of scouting. They liked his power. They like his makeup. He's always played solid defense at third base. So there are things that scouts have liked about him, especially the power. The power has always been there. It's about hunting your pitch, really knowing the strike zone. He's going to swing and miss. I think his strikeout rate is in the 30% range. And I think that's probably what he is, right? But he's got a ton of power. And now he has some idea of the strike zone. When you watch him, if you watch his plate appearances, almost every single one seems to go 3-2. He's getting deep in a count. That means strikeouts. That means like a Kyle Schwarber type of guy where he'll take his walks, but also rack up the strikeouts. But the power is real. Just watch what he's doing. The exit velocity is high. It's elite level. He's not going to lead the league in home runs. He's not going to play at this level for the rest of the way. Teams are going to start pounding him up in the zone would be my guess. And eventually that's going to lead to a little bit of a slump. But I also think this is kind of what he's done throughout his career. These highs and lows are really what he's done. And if he can just continue to give them a heater while they're banged up, I think that they'd take that. I don't know if this is a guy that we're going to be talking about in the same vein as like Max Muncy or Gio Urshela, guys that really, got that opportunity, and the Yankees and the Dodgers kind of developed them into, no, they're not just like flash in the pan guys. They're guys that are going to be in our lineup regularly as long as they're healthy. I think the Cubs would love that. I think the Cubs hope that's what they found. I do think that that's on the table. It's only been a few weeks. It hasn't even been a full month yet. So it's hard to say that this is real, but it looks good. It's not like this is fluky in the sense that he's just kind of lucking into certain things. He regularly hits the ball hard and he has a good plan at the plate. I think it can translate into, at worst, a very solid bench player, a guy that you can trust, can fill in for a couple of weeks if you're dealt injuries. Maybe there's more in there as well.
Yeah, and maybe he's a Dylan Moore type player. And Dylan Moore was productive for fantasy players throughout last season. The long-term viability, somewhat questionable. Maybe Wisdom could be that kind of guy, though. I think a lot of that's going to hinge on how the playing time is distributed as more of the Cubs infield gets healthy. Of course, Nico Hoerner's on the IL right now, David Bodie and Matt Duffy on the IL right now. How do you see the pieces fit playing time-wise for Wisdom once those guys start returning to the roster?
Yeah, it's going to be one of those hard decisions. I think, Duffy probably is the guy of that trio that you mentioned that comes back the soonest. And that immediately, I think, starts giving you questions about playing time. And I think what the main question for me is, can Duffy play second base? Can you get Duffy at second base? If they do feel comfortable putting Duffy at second base, I think it's more about sitting Sogard for the Cubs than sitting Wisdom. Can they find a way to get Duffy in, keep Wisdom, and of course Bryant there too? And then it gets all gummed up when Javy comes back. Javy should be back this weekend. He's not on the IL. His thumb and wrist are bothering him. I expect him to be back this weekend, so we'll see how he is, and if that's just another name that we need to add to the injured list watch with the team. But as Duffy returns, as Nico returns, I think those are the next two guys. I think Wisdom stays on the roster at minimum. He's not being sent down for those two guys. Playing time will go down, though. I think that's inevitable when those two guys return. It just there's no way to find playing time for all these guys. If they didn't, I mean, just think about Bryant and his versatility right now. If they didn't have that, we wouldn't even know about Patrick Wisdom. We may not even know that how valuable Matt Duffy is to this team, right? So Bryant being able to move around helps a lot. Let's see what they can do with Duffy, but eventually Nico comes back and locks in second base, I assume, as long as he's healthy and producing. So that's going to be a question. Once Bodie comes back, that's my biggest question. Do you start saying, hey, we have options on Bodie. Let's let him figure things out at AAA? Because in my mind, Patrick Wisdom is kind of what a best case scenario for David Bodie, a guy that hits the ball really hard, may have some swing and miss issues, but has a decent plan at the plate. But Bodie never consistently put the ball in the air and never consistently got results. Wisdom's doing that. So you ride the guy that gets the results. So I think that's when the real questions come, at least for me. Playing time is going to go down when those two guys come back. It's just a matter of balancing it and figuring out if he has enough time to kind of still continue to produce and force his way into the lineup.
That'll be a good problem for the Cubs to have once they do have it. The lineup and the position players, not the only place where this team is dealing with injury. Trevor Williams was already on the IL. Adbert Alzolay went to the IL earlier this week with a blister. While these guys are out, how do the Cubs fill the rotation?
That feels like an unanswerable question. They're kind of don't need to worry about the fifth starter for a couple days here. We'll see with this day off how they can handle it. They haven't even announced the rotation for the weekend. I assume Kyle Hendricks goes Friday, but they're not giving us that information right now, and they shouldn't. They need to figure out what's going on. Cole Stewart looks like he'll get another spot start. He's not going to, he's not going to eat innings. That's desperately what this team needs right now. Someone that can eat innings. Corey Abbott was called up recently. These are unproven pitchers who aren't going to give them what they need right now, but really all they need is just someone to get through the first 4 or 5 innings. They'll take that with how dominant their bullpen has been. But there aren't any exciting pitchers coming up right now to fill these spots. Not to demean Corey Abbott. He was I believe he was their minor league pitcher of the year in 2019, if I'm remembering my Cubs minor league history properly. But he's an interesting piece. I'd just like to see a lot more before I start talking about him in a fantasy sense. He has a lot to prove, and the command just isn't there as you'd like to see it just yet. But he's got some stuff, and he's got the ingredients to be a legitimate starter in the big leagues. It just comes down to what type of starter will he be. Outside of that, I don't know how they're going to fill out this rotation, how they're going to get through. It's their biggest question going forward. It's the main question. It's the reason I'm not comfortable really putting them, firmly as aggressive buyers this deadline. There's just a lot of questions there, and even when they're healthy, there's questions. So now that they're banged up, it's just more questions for this organization to try and figure out, and it certainly doesn't help. It's not something that if I were giving fantasy advice, I would say if your fantasy team is littered with Cubs starters, you may be having a rough fantasy season.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they put the pieces together in the rotation, because I'm very skeptical. I was skeptical even before they had to tap into the depth the way they've had to, but now even more skeptical. Should fantasy managers be more concerned about Javi Baez's surging strikeout rate or Anthony Rizzo's kind of power outage going back really to last season? We're talking 17 home runs now in his last 113 games. That puts him kind of on like a low 20s home run sort of pace, which isn't bad. But which of those things do you think is a greater concern going forward?
Yeah, for me, I never am concerned about Anthony Rizzo unless the back injury is really something that's sapping his power. I just don't get concerned about him. He goes in like month-long lulls, especially with the power. The power he'll hit for average for like a month, and it'll be like, well, this guy isn't hitting any homers, and then he'll just go on a home run binge. When did he hit his? He hit one Tuesday, I believe. It, I think once you see one, I feel a little more comfortable that the power is going to continue to come for Rizzo. Again, as long as that back's not barking. And I think it's the type of thing where they manage it right now. They've always been like managing his back. I think they're on a little bit more high alert at the moment because I think this was slightly different than what we've seen the past half decade with Rizzo, where he misses 2 or 3 days with a back issue. But I'm not, he's just not someone I worry about. I just expect him to meet his numbers because he always does. He just almost always does. And I'm ready to throw out 2020 for everyone pretty much, good or bad, just because especially with the Cubs, there was something with that offense that just wasn't right. I don't think that's who they are. Javi's strikeout rate, it's higher than it has been the last few years, but I also just feel like Javi's one of those guys you take the good with the bad. He was locked in there for a little bit. The numbers are starting to dip back down. They had gotten to a point where I was like, whoa, he looks almost as good as his MVP type season. I think he's in a little bit of a rut right now. I haven't looked exactly at the recent numbers, but I believe he's a little bit struggling at the plate, and the strikeouts are just going to be there. I guess if you're concerned about Javi's strikeouts, I guess I'd be like, where have you been in the past few years? Like, this is just who Javi is. That it is higher than you'd like it to be. I think that's just who he is, and you take the good with the bad for him, and you kind of know that that's going to come. I don't think it's going to be much higher than it is. I want to say right now it's around 30% strikeout rate. That's high, obviously, but it's also it's not to the point where I like red flags are raising for me where I say, Javi's it's gotten too far, right? Something about Javi where it just doesn't make sense and he produces, right? And at some point that's going to kind of go awry, and we're going to say like, see, this is the issue. This is why he can't have sustained success. I just think we're not at that point yet. He bounced back from a really rough start, and I think for me that showed me a lot about him and reminded me who he is. And I think he's still that guy at least for another couple of years. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But if I had to choose one who I'm more concerned about, yeah, it would probably be the Javi strikeout rate, because like I said, I just always trust that Rizzo's going to put up the numbers that he always puts up.
Guy is hitting for power. He's driving in runs. He's scoring runs. The WRC plus is back above 100, but the batting average down to 240. That's where we get a little worried in the fantasy world with the strikeout rate in the mid 30s at 240. You go back a couple of years when he hit 281 in 2019, strikeout rate was at 28%, 290 in 2017. It was at 26%. So that's the tiny spot where we get worried about the strikeout rate starting to climb, bringing down those rate categories. One more question for you here, Sahadev, before we let you go. Season started on April 1st. I think by like April 8th, people were ready to put Craig Kimbrel into the trade discussion. But here we are into the second week of June. The Cubs are 35-27. They've got a plus 33 run differential. They're in first place in the NL Central. Can we put the Craig Kimbrel rumors to bed yet? Or is this something we still need to be thinking about over the next 5, 6, 7 weeks?
I'd say you can almost put it to bed. You can try and get fancy and creative and say the Cubs can still be buyers and flip Kimbrel because their bullpen is so deep. I think we can have that. That's a fun discussion to have. I really don't think it's very realistic. I think it's more just like a talking point that we can use to say, how can they kind of toe the line here? But unless they just completely tank the rest of this very difficult June, they have a brutal June schedule that they're in the midst of. Unless they go in the tank, I'd say how can you trade Craig Kimbrel? He's been dominant. You're in the playoff race. He's so good. It's not like he's just okay. There's you can count the number of closers that you'd even argue are better this year on one hand, if that. Like I don't know the list of great relievers right now off the top of my head and across baseball, but Kimbrel has to be in the top 5 for closers this season. When he goes in, especially right now, he's on a run where when he goes in, it doesn't look like the opposition has a chance to do anything. Like a hit kind of comes as a surprise. Sometimes contact comes as a surprise. So he's in one of those zones right now. He's been in it for a while. It feels like it's not just this year. It's been since about August 15th of last year.
Mm-hmm.
He's just been dominant, and it's not okay or, oh, this guy's much better than what the Craig Kimbrel was in 2019. This is one of the best relievers in baseball, reminding us why he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and he's back on that. So I don't see, right, the Cubs are in first place. They're in the midst of a very difficult stretch of games. If they, go 1 and whatever for the next, 15, 1 and 14, if they just fall apart, yeah, Craig Kimbrel will be on the open market, but he's not going to be traded the way they're playing right now. He's too valuable. This team is too good to be trading away, your best reliever and a shutdown closer. It doesn't make sense to me, but I would all but close that.
Craig Kimbrel back to his dominant ways this season. Sahadev Sharma, always dominant with the Cubs information. Check him out on Twitter at Sahadev Sharma. Sahadev, thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
Look, no one's perfect. Even the best baseball players strike out with the bases loaded. The best golfers, sometimes they 3-putt with the tournament on the line. So if you feel like you come up short in the bedroom sometimes, it is perfectly okay. If it's bothering you, there are options. Go to GetRoman.com/FBPod now. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation and ongoing care for ED, all from the comfort and privacy of your home. A U.S. licensed healthcare professional will work with you to find the best treatment plan, and if medication is appropriate, it ships to you free with 2-day shipping. The whole process is straightforward and discreet. Getting started, that is simple. All you got to do is go to GetRoman.com/FBPod and complete an online visit. Take care of your ED without leaving home. Complete an online visit today to connect with a doctor and take care of it. Go to GetRoman.com/FBPod now to get $15 off your first month. This is a straightforward way to take care of your ED. GetRoman.com/FBPod. Get started now to save $15 on your first month of treatment. HelloFresh cuts stressful meal planning and grocery store trips so you can enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in about 30 minutes or less. HelloFresh offers 25 plus recipes to choose from each week, from vegetarian meals to craft burgers and extra special gourmet options. There's something for everyone to enjoy, with all recipes designed and tested by professional chefs and nutritional experts to ensure deliciousness and simplicity. Who doesn't love deliciousness? HelloFresh also is a great deal. According to a Zagat dining survey, it is about 28% cheaper, than shopping at your local grocery store, and 72% cheaper than a restaurant. You don't have to sacrifice any of the quality. Right now, go to HelloFresh.com/FantasyMLB12. Use the code FantasyMLB12 and get 12 free meals. Also, free shipping with that. HelloFresh.com/FantasyMLB12 with the code FantasyMLB12 gets you 12 free meals, and those come to you with free shipping. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. All right, we move on now to Alec Lewis, our Kansas City Royals beat writer here at The Athletic. Alec, I'm going to jump in with this team in the bullpen. Josh Staumont recently back from the IL. Before he went on the IL, he had seemed to establish himself, if not the locked-in closer, at least from the fantasy perspective, the go-to guy, the guy in the bullpen that you wanted. Team hasn't had a save opportunity since he has been back from the IL. Is it safe to assume that he is back in that role he was in before he went on the IL?
I actually don't. I'm not so sure about it. I think initially I would have answered that question for sure 100%, but his velocity, it's been down since the beginning of the year. I mean, he came out of the gate, was throwing 98, 99. That's the Josh Staumont that I think the Royals and Royals fans expected. But last outing, I don't know if it was Tuesday night, the velocity was down to like 93, 94. And he does have carry on the fastball, but he's a totally different pitcher because he can't get swing and miss as well with that pitch. And then the curveball's not as lethal. So I'm not so sure. Scott Barlow has been so good all year, and they've used him in this. Mike Matheny calls it a cleanup leverage role where they need him in any situation that's a close game. So I'm not sure if Scott will start to get saves. I just am not sold that Josh Staumont's going to be that guy if this velocity remains down. And I think Josh has talked about how right at the beginning of spring training, he missed time due to COVID, and it was a pretty tough case, and he lost a lot of strength that he built up during the offseason. And I think that's contributed just to this lack of velocity. And he's also dealt with the knee injury, his arms. I mean, he's pitched more than he ever has. So it would be hard for me to sit here and convincingly tell you, yes, Josh Staumont's going to stick in that role, because he's not the same guy that I think they would want to see closing games back there.
And they were so flexible with that role last season too, and even early this year, that always kind of puts that little seed of doubt in the back of my mind too about committing to one reliever as a primary source of saves on this Royals team. Let's talk about Jackson Kowar. Had a disappointing debut, didn't make it out of the first inning. He threw 39 pitches, and thanks to co-hosting Rates and Barrels with Eno Saris, I have access to the black box that is Stuff Plus and Command Plus. The silver lining, as Eno said on yesterday's show, the pitches weren't that bad. Like, if you watch the outing, you're like, well, that wasn't good. We saw him throw like a 52-footer that bounced, in front of the plate. All of this being said, what kind of leash are they going to give Koar? Do you think the approach with Daniel Lynch earlier this season is probably going to be instructive in terms of how quickly Koar has to figure it out before he possibly gets sent back down to AAA?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the 52-footer. I think that came on a changeup, and I will ask him when we have access if that's the worst changeup he's thrown in years, because I guarantee that's his pitch. I mean, it's an incredible pitch. So it was funny to see. The only interesting element to this, I think they would love to just see Jackson start, continue to give him opportunities, let him go for as long as his arm remains healthy this year, because he dominated AAA, and I'm not really sure what the value would be in sending him back down. It's not like Daniel Lynch where they have some delivery stuff they want to work on, I don't think, at this point. So I think they'd let him run. But the only confounding variable to this would be Danny Duffy, who obviously has been on the IL with the flexor strain in his left arm, but he's been throwing recently. And I think they would love to build him back up and get him back in the rotation. And so if there's an odd man out, if Jackson continues to struggle, though, to your point, I just don't think he will to that level, at least. I think maybe Danny slides in and they send Jackson back down. But I think for the time being, he's here. And to your point, I mean, it looked like the stuff was fine. It's just he was breathing as if it was as if he was about to step on a roller coaster, and it was the scariest roller. I mean, the adrenaline was so evident. His gum, I felt bad for with how hard he was chewing on it. So I think for the time being, he's in that rotation. They don't like sending guys down as quick as they had with Daniel Lynch, but I think just in that circumstance, they had to do some things with his delivery and refine just the deception of it, I would say.
I think we can all forgive a guy making his major league debut having a nerve or two when he's out there on the mound. Edward Olivares has had a little bit of an interesting season, and I realize he's not, this ultimate elite, great top prospect, but he's a guy who could seem to be useful. He's had a nice year at the AAA level, and I'm just curious as to what the deal is with this yo-yo routine they've had with him up to the majors twice and back down to AAA twice. Are we ever going to see him get an extended run with the team this year?
Yeah, I think instead of wanting him to play baseball, they just want to see how good of a taxi driver he can be between Omaha and Kansas City. And maybe he'll just drive other guys up and down. He'll be so good at knowing the roads. They've optioned him like 3 times in a week and a half. For him, I can't even remotely imagine what that would be like. And the thing is, when he's gotten to Kansas City and played with the big league club, he's gotten a hit, I think, in 4 of the 5 games he's played in, or 3 of the 4. So it's, he raked AAA, and if he's going to continue to do that, he's going to get opportunity. Similarly to kind of like the Duffy situation, they've kept rolling Jorge Soler and Hunter Dozier out there every day, because I guess if those guys, the ceiling is what it is. If they turn it on, they produce in a way that probably Edward Olivares' bat can't. But at some point, and I think they feel this way too. I mean, you can only say Jorge Soler, it's only June. At some point, you got to kind of make a decision here. And I think where they are in the standings will play into that. But Edward's done everything a guy can do at AAA to start this season to earn big league at bats. And it's just got to be tough for him to not consistently get big league at bats at the major league level. But they're also, the way the Royals operate, if a guy isn't going to get big league at bats on a daily basis and he's a prospect, then they're going to find a way to get him every day at bats. And so that's why they've put him on the Omaha to Kansas City tour like 17 times in the past week and a half.
Maybe it's something that ends after the trade deadline at the end of July, though. Perhaps we see him play a lot in the final 2 months of the season, depending on how things play out. Andrew Benintendi has been putting together a nice season. Alec, I'm talking about a guy that has put up a 2020 season in the past. 15-15 sort of looks like his floor at this point. Where do you see things going from here? Do you see him as a long-term piece for the Royals, or do you see him as a possible candidate that they could turn around and possibly flip later this summer?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think he started slow out of the gate, and people were like, I mean, did he just lose every skill that it seemed he seemed to show in Boston? And then obviously he's talked a lot about getting back to the bat path that made him so successful, and it seems like that's worked. I mean, his timing's been really good. He's moved the ball to all fields. He's been incredible with runners in scoring position over the last like month and a half. So in terms of the future, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the Royals don't have that many high-end outfield prospects. I mean, they have a guy, Kyle Isbell, who started the year in the big league, so I think they believe will be an everyday big leaguer. And then they have some other guys down the line, but they're going to need outfielders if they want to contend the way I know they want to in 22 and 23. So I think he could be a long-term piece. And I think I mean, finding a time for an extension, it wouldn't shock me if they tried to make that happen. It seems like they don't love doing that in the middle of seasons. I mean, they extended last offseason Salvi and before spring training, Salvi and Hunter Dozier. So I think they might ride it out the whole year and see kind of how that goes. Unless, I mean, you never know. They've talked about needing to be more transactional. So if there's a great offer, who knows? But I think he could be a long-term piece. Defensively, I wonder sometimes watching him, but at the plate, he's been really good of late for sure.
Bobby Witt Jr. is the ultra elite prospect for this team at the AA level right now. Do we see him in the majors this year as anything more than a late season call-up, someone who can get enough time in the big leagues to make a fantasy impact?
The only way I think he gets everyday opportunities at the big league level and beyond just the late season call up is if they are in contention and they have an opportunity for him to play every day. And maybe that's injury. Adalberto Mondesi has not been able to stay healthy ever. So maybe if they're in contention, that is an option. But I think that's a long shot. So I just don't see it unless he just really forces their hand. And I mean, he's performed at a level of late that would seem to mean that he would put himself in a good position for that. And with guys like Hunter Dozier struggling and guys like Mondesi not in the lineup, you could argue it. I just think with how this has gone with them promoting Daniel Lynch and promoting Jackson Kowar and just the early struggles, and you look around and you see Jared Kelenic and some of this stuff, I think they're going to be really mindful of making sure the guy's as ready as you can try to make sure a guy is before they do this with Bobby, as talented and as skilled as they believe he is.
We're sitting here on June 10th. The Royals are 7.5 back of the White Sox in the AL Central. They're 5.5 games out of the wild card. Fangraphs has them with a 4.2% chance of making the playoffs. If they do have to go into sell mode, which might not be sell everybody, but it might just be making some room for younger guys like Olivares, who else do you think could possibly be on the move on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting. Mike Minor has not been great this year, but they signed him to a 2-year deal this past offseason. So maybe if a team wants a starter, I could see that being a possibility. Carlos Santana, he's also been really up and down. When he's been good, I mean, this is, I guess, his career, but when he's been good, he's been really good. And then I think of late, he's like 1 for his last 21, and it's just brutal at bats with him not taking pitches the way he does. If a team wants a I don't know, guy to improve their OBP, he could be a guy. And then I think, I mean, the bullpen arms, they have a ton of young, controllable guys. I mean, Scott Barlow, I think they would love to have for when they are contending. I think Josh Staumont the same way. But if a team offers something that is intriguing, I think they might listen to something like that. But I think those would be the guys. It's not a trade deadline laden team. It feels like. I mean, we mentioned Benintendi. Maybe that's an option, but yeah, it's definitely an interest. They put together this team so interestingly because it's a mix of young guys they know are going to take time and older veterans who want to compete and contend. And it's like, how do you balance that together? And what do you do when push comes to shove at the deadline? It'll be interesting to see.
All right, that's Alec Lewis, Kansas City Royals beat writer here at The Athletic on what has been a roller coaster team so far this season. Alec, thanks for joining us on the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast.
Of course, guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Think about all the purchases you've made over the last year. Probably a lot of delivery, right? One thing you probably haven't thought about too much is the insurance purchases that you've made. Americans overspend on car and home insurance by billions every year. That's money that can be spent on more delivery. And that's where the Zebra can help you. The Zebra is the nation's leading insurance comparison site for car and home insurance. In minutes, you can compare policies from every major provider for free, all on one independent marketplace. After a few quick questions, the Zebra pairs people with the right insurance company for them, helping everyone save time and money. You can buy online or over the phone with one of their licensed agents, no hidden fees, and the Zebra has no stake in the policy you choose. Just go ahead and make insurance the best and smartest purchase that you've made yet. Visit thezebra.com/fantasy MLB to get your free quote today. That's thezebra.com/fantasy MLB. All right, second half of the show time, and we are going to get into something that has been talked about quite a bit in Major League Baseball over the last week or so, really. I mean, really all season, but Garrett Cole helped bring this to the forefront with his what a press conference moment. I mean, just unbelievable, unintentional humor. Absolutely love it. Of course, we're talking about all the sticky substances, the increase in spin rate that we've seen in Major League Baseball over the last few years, and how we can potentially use that in the fantasy world. And DVR, I think what we look at is that if MLB is really going to get serious about cracking down on that from this point forward, which it sounds like they might be. Their hand might have been forced, but it sounds like this is something they might be getting serious about for the remainder of the 2021 season. Is there anything actionable we can do? I guess let's start there and then we can narrow our focus. But just when you're looking at this broadly, is there anything that comes to mind instantly actionable that we can do in the fantasy world if we do see MLB start policing the use of sticky substances by the letter of the law?
On the one hand, I think not really, because it's very, very difficult to look at spin rates and pitch mix and figure out how much of what a pitcher is doing can be attributed to the specific substance they're using. And if we go from spider tack plus Coke plus whatever the most extreme substances are, and let those pitchers go back to rosin and sunscreen or something else, are they going to go from maxing out spin efficiency to being 90% as effective? Like, I think it's an incredibly difficult game to play. We had this exact same problem back in the PED era. And we always had this problem when players would get popped for PEDs. People would say, oh, the power is going to go away now. And I'd kind of look at it and say, no, not necessarily. Like, you could take PEDs and have a bunch of gains and sustain those gains and cycle off your PEDs, and you're stronger than you were before. So I want to look at this and try and have a scientific approach. I think we have to have a pretty rigorous idea of what exactly would have to change for there to be a massive difference in performance. If you're taking elite players and making them very good players, you're still going to want those guys in your team.
Right.
If most of the league or a large faction of the league is getting this advantage and everyone is kind of falling together, albeit at slightly different rates, you're still not necessarily getting that much of a leg up by parting ways with someone that you suspect to be gaining more of an advantage than someone else.
Yeah, so I think two very important points there. The first one is that we can't presume to know how this is going to affect players. So as you said, it's a dangerous game to try to say Trevor Bauer, for example, huge spin rate increaser over the last couple of seasons. Now he can't use the substances he's been using. Suddenly Trevor Bauer goes from a top 5-10 starting pitcher, whatever, to, barely inside the top 30. Like, that is pretty silly to try to say, and just very dangerous to try to project for certain players. And then again, as you said, if we're talking about elite players becoming merely great players, those are still guys you're going to want on your team. And I think this will help. I compiled a list of the guys who are in the top 10 in spin rate for four-seamers, sinkers, sliders, and curveballs. You're going to hear a lot of the same names in all four of these groups. And they're guys like Trevor Bauer, Corbin Burns, Walker Buehler, Joe Musgrove, Yu Darvish. Like, if someone wants to project those guys falling off because they can't use whatever we suppose they've been using to this point of the season, another important point, right? We can't say with certainty who's using what and who's using anything and whatever. Like, I'll take them. I'll take you, Darvish. You want to trade me, Yu Darvish? You want to trade me Joe Musgrove? You want to trade me Walker Buehler because you think he's suddenly going to fall off because he can only go back to sweat and sunscreen? I'll take that. I will go ahead and take someone like that. So I think it just becomes a very dangerous game to play. And so when you think about if this happens, what is actionable? Is anything actionable? And if so, what is? I think if you're going to build an argument for something being actionable, it has nothing to do with the pitchers and everything to do with the hitters. And maybe we start targeting hitters. Maybe we start targeting struggling hitters in trade discussions. Maybe we are a little bit more aggressive for hitters when we're making our fab decisions going forward. I think that's really where there could potentially, and I'm saying potentially, be gains to be had in the fantasy world.
Right. And I think if you were going to trade away pitchers, the group that you mentioned, the guys who are high spin across the board, who don't just have one pitch they rely on, but have 3 or 4 that would spin less, spin differently, they could be the most vulnerable. Could be. But a lot of those guys are also good, smart pitchers with deep arsenals. They're going to do something else. If something stops working, they're going to rely on a different pitch. I mean, Bauer throws, 5, 6 pitches? Corbin Burns throws 5 pitches now. So if 1 or 2 pitches don't work anymore, he's still a 3 or 4 pitch guy. He's still going to have different weapons he can lean on. So, yeah, account for it that way. But the hitter side, it's even harder for me to figure out which hitters exactly would we want to target. Like, which hitters are struggling the most in a higher spin sort of environment. And I think the type of pitch that we talk about a lot now is the high fastball. It's very difficult to handle high fastballs, especially the high spin high fastballs, because they have that extra bit of ride and guys cut underneath them. So if that pitch is one that you struggle with way more than other hitters, maybe then we target that group of hitters and say, okay, now that most of the league can't do this as effectively as it did before, this major flaw is only going to be a reasonable flaw instead of a devastating one.
That's a good point. I think that's really the pitch that you look at. And I hadn't had that pulled up. We should take a look at these guys. I'm pulling up Savant right now, Baseball Savant, go-to website for sure for all of us, and really the baseball world, certainly the fantasy world. Let's think about that, and like what the best way to search for guys who are struggling on high fastballs, because I think it gives us an interesting group of players that we can potentially target in trade discussions, maybe in fab discussions, depending on how deep we're starting to look and who we are talking about. Another group of guys who I pulled are guys who just have high in-zone swing and miss rates this season. I felt like that was sort of a logical way to go. And of course, it's not going to represent every single player who could maybe improve from a lower spin environment. And it's going to miss some guys. It's going to highlight some guys who aren't going to improve. But I thought that guys who are swinging and missing a ton in the zone, especially relative to their previous career marks, are guys who maybe, if the spin comes down a little bit, will start catching up to those pitches they are missing, doing damage against those pitches that they are missing. So I thought that would be an interesting group of guys to look at too. I'm going to pull the high fastball guys. I'm going to throw some names at you from that group. And in the meantime, I'm going to pull some of those high fastball guys as well. The first one who jumped out at me when I looked at that group, again, this is in zone high whiff rates, Matt Chapman. We know he's having just huge struggles this season, totally anomalous compared with where he's been the last few years. And his in-zone contact rate is down 8 percentage points from his career mark. So that's someone who potentially looks interesting to me.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at something like in-zone whiffing, you also want to make sure you're talking about a player that is presumed to be completely healthy, because
Right.
I think that's the other main thing that would cause you to swing and miss more often at pitches that you previously were able to hit. So I would kind of want to filter out guys that I'm concerned about health wise. Does Chapman
Mhm.
still fit that bill coming off of surgery in the offseason, or would you say he's been out there pretty much every day this season, therefore he's fine? Like that's like the one extra filter I think I want to put on that particular lens.
I think that's definitely a fair filter to want to put on it. We can't possibly know about health, right? We can't possibly know how a guy is feeling day to day unless the team is just giving us the sort of information that they never will, and understandably so. I lean more toward what you said about the fact that he's been out there generally every day. I really feel like, especially with the way this team's playing and with the way the AL West is shaping up and just the AL playoff race, like if he were really hurting and they were as comfortably above 500 as they are right now, I think they'd find an excuse to get him to the IL. I really do. I think they would just find, like, especially since he's been able to play this many games, they know it's not suddenly going to turn into a month-long stint on the IL. I think they would find a way to get him 10 days, 2 weeks to just sit down, rehab or rest whatever is bothering him, and then get him back in the lineup. So I tend to believe that he is on the healthier side of the divide. And that's why I think that this could be something that becomes interesting for Matt Chapman and maybe makes him someone to target. And again, as we wrap this all into every sort of fantasy angle that we talk about, you and I have talked about this many times. It's very easy to say, sell high, buy low. It's a completely different thing to say, buy low on this guy that someone is willing to trade you. Yeah, I saw some articles out there about buying low on like Mookie Betts, and like who's going to trade Mookie Betts right now? Who in the world doesn't think that Mookie Betts is going to have a better next 4 months than he's had to this point of the season? I think Matt Chapman is a guy who you can go and buy at a discount if you believe in the things that I'm talking about here. So that's I really think that I'm going to lean toward the health factor for him, lean toward him being healthy, and say he's someone that I do like to go after here.
Yeah, and I think Chapman makes sense because the other thing I'm looking for when I'm trading for players anyway is I'm looking for guys who don't get days off. It's the easiest way to make up ground.
Yes.
Guys that do not share their role with anybody else can give you better counting stats than guys that have a 75 or 80 or 85% playing time share. So that's the other thing that kind of works in Matt Chapman's favor too, is someone you consider targeting at this point in the season. Some of the other hitters that you pulled for this, Brandon Lowe is a guy that I've only got, I think, in one league, and he's the worst player on my offense. Like, I think he literally the worst player in my offense. And my offense is good otherwise. And I keep looking at him and thinking, does anybody want to buy low on Brandon Lowe, or is he an obvious hold for me and I can move somebody who's played really well and basically have Lowe get back to the level I expect him to be at all along and not really miss anything offensively, given how bad he's been so far, but then also get a much needed upgrade on the pitching side, because a 70.1% in zone contact rate for Lowe is definitely not something I expected to see. He's had swing and miss in his game throughout his time in the big leagues, right? He's got a career 30.3% strikeout rate, but he draws walks and the power's legit. Like, he's the kind of guy that has enough power to get away with an elevated strikeout rate when things are going well.
And you know what? Here's something interesting. I think you're going to like this DVR. So I didn't pull it exactly perfectly. I didn't pull it because we're trying to have a show here. I'm not trying to just sit here and stare at my computer and figure something out. So I don't have rate. I don't have rate of high fastballs swung at and missed in the zone. I do have raw number of high fastballs swung at and missed. Brandon Lowe is 16th, or Brandon Lowe is tied for 13th in the majors. 22 in zone, high fastball, swing and miss. So we've seen that happen to him. And we can start to marry these things together, and you're going to see some crossover. Guess who's sixth? Matt Chapman. 26 of these for him. So we are starting to see these things line up. So first of all, let's pat ourselves on the back. We're both sort of just supposing this, and maybe there's something to it, because we're seeing a lot of guys line up, guys who have in zone high whiff rates, and also showing up on this most of high fastball swung at and missed in the zone as well. So maybe this is somewhere where we can find some gains. I do think that on Brandon Lowe specifically, everything you said holds. Everything you said holds true. The power we know is for sure. He's going to walk. He's in a good lineup. Like, everything lines up for him to be someone I think to target, not only as someone who maybe is a gainer if sticky substances are cracked down on, but again, someone who his current manager isn't going to hold fast to him. His current manager isn't going to think, I can't sell out now because a bounce back is inevitably coming, the way it could be for Mookie Betts, or maybe the way people are thinking about Anthony Rendon right now. That's just not necessarily the player who Brandon Lowe is. So I do think that he's someone who we can talk about in this context. Another guy, who is on this list, he is number 2 in terms of high fastballs in the zone that he has swung at and missed, and also on our list of in-zone whiff rate being high, Ozzie Albies. Ozzie Albies' contact rate on balls in the zone that he has swung at is down 5 percentage points from his career. He has the second most swing and miss at fastballs up in the zone this season. And all the X stats for Ozzie Albies are looking pretty strong, too. He looked like an X stat buyer over the last couple of weeks. I know there's something you and Eno talked about on yesterday's episode of Rates and Barrels, saying that there's not necessarily a correlation. You can't necessarily use the X stats in season, but these things are starting to line up for Ozzie Albies too, as someone who maybe becomes a gainer if the sticky substances are cracked down on.
Yeah, pretty interesting to see him there. I ran the query pretty similar to the way you did, but I think I tagged the top 2 little zones that go above, like 1, 2, and 3 across the top. I included the pitches that are balls, like high fastballs above the zone, because I think hitters get fooled on those. They look like pitches that are going to come in at the top of the zone, and the ride keeps them above the top of the zone. So you make a bad decision. You swing at a pitch that if you hit it, you're going to pop it up. That is the only thing you're going to do with a fastball above the zone is just hit an infield fly ball, which is results-wise basically a strikeout. You're not driving in a run. You're not getting on base. Nothing good is happening on an infield fly ball. Albies is interesting to me for one other reason, and I think it's because of the success we're seeing from Cedric Mullins, who stopped switch hitting this season. Albies might be the kind of guy that should stop switch hitting at some point. He has a lot more success from the right side against lefties. It makes you wonder if maybe he reaches a point in the next year or two where he says, you know what, I'm just hitting from the right side all the time. And that might unlock something for him too. But yeah, I just think this is the type of player I would think about buying on right now. I'd want to have other reasons for liking the player beyond this too. This can't be the only thing driving me to go after one of these players.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to say off the top of my head, I'm pulling it up right now, that Albies is in one of his best, if not his best, stretch of the season. I feel as just anecdotally, it feels like he's been relatively hot. Yeah, I mean, if you go back on May 31st, the end of play on May 31st, he was hitting 231, 310, 478. He has played 8 games since then. He's up to 261, 335, 509. So we're talking about a gain of about 30 points in all of batting average, OVP, and slugging percentage over the last 10 days or so. So Albies is starting to turn it on. I know we don't want to necessarily get bogged down in this, but there are a few more guys who are checking all these boxes. I ran the same query that you did too. Someone who comes up in both of these, Javy Baez. We talked about him earlier with Sahadev Sharma. The power has been there for him this season. Sahadev expects him to come back for the weekend series at Wrigley against the Cardinals. A guy who is way down on in-zone contact. Javy Baez, we know there's going to be swing and miss in his game. Always has been, always will be. But he doesn't swing and miss a ton in the zone. The swing and miss that gets him into trouble is that he's flailing at breaking balls out of the zone. He doesn't swing and miss a ton in the zone. We have seen that from him this season, and we have seen it a lot on those high fastballs, ones that do elevate out of the zone. Down 7% in contact rate in zone. He ranks second in the majors in terms of high fastballs swung at and missed when you include balls that are out of the zone, above the zone. Another guy who maybe is going to be hard to trade for, but with the fact that his rates are so low, the fact that he's coming off this thumb injury, that's obviously going to maybe make you take a step back, but maybe someone who you could go after right now.
Yeah, I was looking at the results from the Memorial Day weekend second chance NFBC leagues, mostly because I think that's about as good of an in-season trade guide as you're going to have, where you have a lot of people who are significantly invested in those leagues,
right?
Doing the research, planning out what they want to do, and making decisions on players. And Baez has moved up in terms of his ADP in those drafts compared to where he was going back in March, but he's a fringe top 50 guy in those drafts. His ADP in 11 drafts from that NFBC second chance formats was 51 overall. So you're talking about a guy that in a 15-team league would go early part of round 5. No, early part of
4.
mid 4.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can do math. There's power and speed around the flaws, so that's obviously why people are still interested.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that's an unreasonable price to pay for Baez trade-wise. Like if he's treated like a fringe top 50 guy in your league, you're probably getting something a little more than that because stolen bases, as we know, are extremely valuable. He offers those up. And frankly, like he hits the ball so hard that the batting average isn't as low as you'd think it is for a guy that strikes out almost 35% of the time. So I think he's a little easier to get than he would be without that swing and miss tendency. I think if he had even a 28% K rate, the confidence level in Baez would be disproportionately higher.
That's absolutely true. And I'm just going to drive home the point I made when we were talking to Sahadev earlier. He's got a K rate up at 36.7% this season. And the batting average is 240 and the OBP is 276. Go back to 2019. The K rate was down at 27.8%, batting average 281, OBP 316. 2018, 25.9% K rate, batting average 290, OBP 326. Let's go back one more year into 2017, 28.3% K rate, a 273 batting average, and a 317 OBP. I mean, I think we can draw a straight line to Javier Baez reducing his strikeout rate and the batting average and OBP going up. I mean, it's just, we've seen it now for like 4 or 5 straight full seasons for Javier Baez. So if this is true for him, if he will be better off again in a lower spin environment against fastballs, against high fastballs, maybe he doesn't chase quite as much if breaking balls aren't breaking as much, although I think Javi Baez chasing breaking balls is a ship that has sailed along with Pedro Serrano's. Like I think he could be a big gainer because if we're talking about a guy who, again, 14 homers, 32 runs, 39 RBIs, 9 steals, the Cubs are 3rd or 4th in the majors in steals. They are really one of the teams that is running this season. If we're not talking about someone who can hit 270 even with a 320 OBP the rest of the season, you're going to see a guy who does perform at that MVP level that Sahadev referenced from a few years ago where he was one of the, 15 top hitters in our fantasy game. So he's someone who, again, I really, really like quite a bit. Someone else who I wanted to bring up here in this discussion, Rafael Devers is also at the top of a lot of these lists. He's doing just fine this season. Nate Lowe was another guy who I wanted to bring up, and I didn't include him on our sheet because he didn't fit that in-zone contact rate decliner that I was looking for. But his wasn't as extreme as these guys we've talked about, but it was there. And he's another guy who is showing up in these high fastball swing and miss leaderboards. Is Nate Lowe someone you would think about as a potential trade target?
Probably not. I think while Lowe got off to a nice start, he is looking exactly like the player that he was between 2019 and 2020 as a up and down sort of guy with the Rays. He's a slightly above average hitter who strikes out a little more than you'd like, draws plenty of walks, and has below average power for a first baseman. 19 homers and 507 career plate appearances. It doesn't mean that's exactly who he is going forward, but you're looking for more of an impact power bat. Playing time maybe isn't that much of a concern. I think we're just wondering at this point if there's any more of a ceiling there. So you look at the projections the rest of the way, 14 to 15 home runs across the board, a 240, high 240s, like low 250s sort of average with a good OBP, decent counting stats, but not amazing counting stats because the Rangers are likely a below average offense, maybe even like a bottom 6 offense the rest of the way. So I'd probably hold off on him if it's a really deep league and it's just about finding, like an AL only league or a 20-team mixed league or something. Yeah, sure. I think he's fine in those really, really deep formats, but I don't think he moves the needle enough to be the kind of guy you want to seek out in your more shallow and medium-sized mixed leagues.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I really think that if we are onto something with this, and you can believe that I will be tracking this the rest of the season, because I think we might be onto something with this formula. And again, this is all predicated on cracking down on foreign sticky substances that pitchers aren't supposed to be using, which I do think is coming. I do think that is coming. And let me a quick aside here. Like, shouldn't this be the easiest problem in the world for Major League Baseball to fix? I can't believe, like, as funny as that Garrett Cole press conference moment was, like, why is MLB making their pitchers, their best pitchers, deal with this? Couldn't MLB just come out and say, this is a problem. We've let it go on we've known about it. It didn't seem to be a huge issue. We've let it go on too long. we're cracking down from this. Like, shouldn't this be so easy? Shouldn't this be so easy for MLBs to fix? No one talks about it anymore. They actually do police the letter of the law, and we forget about it. It's just this fun little blip on our radar that lasted for a couple of seasons, and we're done.
I mean, you'd think that you would want people to talk about Vlad Jr.'s ascent to stardom,
Yes.
Marcus Semien being an amazing free agent signing by the Jays, and Jesse Winker coming into his own, and the Giants having a bunch of old guys that are raking again. Any of those things, all of those things are 100 times more interesting than this air quotes scandal, which MLB is just letting unfold. But you and I have been on this planet for the exact same number of days. We were born on the same day. At no point in our lifetimes have we ever seen Major League Baseball come out and take accountability for anything. So
it's true.
if past behavior is any indication, this will get worse and become even more of a scandal, dumb story than it already is. Like, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Hopefully it gets better, because there's a lot of really fun, amazing storylines that we could get into, and we will continue to get into. This is why we play. We all love baseball. So the fact that we're in the first half of June of an exciting season, our first season back after pandemic hellball in 2020, we should be talking about what's happening on the field. Figure it out, MLB. Come on.
So much new blood in the game, so many new competing teams, so many, I mean, all the, like you said, right? All the young Vlad Jr. doing what he's doing, Fernando Tatis doing what he's doing, Ronald Acuna doing what he's doing, all this great young talent in the game, new teams competing, a bunch of teams competing for playoff spots. And here we are talking about what is not even a scandal, what is something we just knew was happening. And MLB has every single power to get it under control and be done with it. And here we are, as you said, if past is prologue, MLB is going to make this worse before it gets better. I will say, however, just to wrap up this discussion and wrap up this episode, Matt Chapman, Javier Baez, Brandon Lowe, three guys who I think are gettable, who you might want to go after if this does indeed happen. And then Ozzie Albies, another guy who I think you want to go after, but maybe not quite as gettable as those first three guys. So something to consider as you go into the weekend if you are in the trade market in your fantasy league. We're going to wrap things up for this episode of the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Derek and I will be back with you on Sunday talking waivers and fab. We'll be doing that live again, so be sure to join us on our YouTube page. Bring any waivers and fab questions that you might have to that show. We will talk to you then. Until then, for Derek Van Riper, Sahadev Sharma, and Alec Lewis, I'm Michael Beller. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Sunday.